All right, everybody, welcome back. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors. And Tom, you're up for our next panel. First, let's do a quick audio check. Doug, good afternoon.
Hello there. Good
Yeah,
to be
we
here.
gotcha. Bob,
Good afternoon.
Kelly,
Hi, Laura. Can you hear me?
I can, and Sherry.
Hi, Laura.
All good. All right, Tom.
Okay, Laura, you good? Sound check?
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard Chris Geldart fixed the FiOS fiber break, so we're all in good hands.
I can cross that off my list then. That's great, Tom. Thank you.
Very good. Excited for you all to meet the members of this next panel. I've been working with all of them personally over the years, all problem solvers, and can't wait to jump into it. So our panel moderator is Kelly McKinney. Kelly has had a leadership role in pretty much every major disaster in New York City for more than 15 years, all the way from the aftermath of 9/11 attacks to present day. As deputy commissioner at the New York City Office of Emergency Management, he assembled a task force of hundreds led by the Fire Department of New York City and the National Guard to knock on thousands of doors across the coastal devastated area during Superstorm Sandy. Huge effort, as one of many. He's rebuilt the city's disaster planning program, including the coastal storm plan, about which the New York Post has said the planning makes perfect. As chief officer of the American Red Cross, he rushed to the aid of children and families affected by disaster, most notably in March 2014 when Con Edison had a gas explosion on 125th Street in Harlem. He's the founding principal of Emergency Management America, as a 501c3 nonprofit, and a mission to advance the professionalism and practice of emergency management. He's a professional engineer with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Kansas. Always wondered how a Kansas guy got in New York City, Kelly. And a master's degree in public administration from Columbia University in New York City. Kelly also has published his first book entitled The Moment of Truth, The Nature of Disasters and How to Prepare for Them. It's on Amazon. We'll put the link in the chat. Currently, he's a senior director of emergency management and enterprise resilience at NYU Langone, a world-class academic health center based in New York City, and also serves, amongst all those duties, serves on our board of directors for the All Hazards Consortium. So Kelly, thanks for facilitating, and let's jump into it.
I got to cut that bio back. Oh my God, how long have you had that? Thank you very much. And I appreciate the invitation to host this distinguished panel. We met before to talk, and I can't imagine an issue that's more important than this one. This is an issue that we're going to talk about in the aftermath, actually in the midst of a global pandemic where the vulnerabilities were brought right to the forefront. And we have, I think, three of the top experts and representatives in their respective sectors here. And I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves. And let's start to my immediate right. Sherry, can you tell us who you are and what you do for a living?
Yes, hi, Sherry Stone. I'm the Vice President of the Energy Marketers Association. So we represent marketers, the people who bring fuel to wherever it's needed, mostly gas stations. And those marketers also own about a third of all the gas stations and then supply fuel to the rest. So we're very involved in anything disaster related.
And when we had our pre-meeting, Sherry and I spent a lot of time talking about Superstorm Sandy, and when the gasoline sector was pretty significantly impacted in the Northeast, and the issues that caused. Robert?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Crow. I am Director of Emergency Response and Crisis Management here at AmerisourceBergen Corporation. AmerisourceBergen is a pharmaceutical distribution and services company. We are a global company with 470 locations in 53 countries on 6 continents. So we pretty much got some activity going on in every time zone around the world. My key role here is to lead our emergency response process as well as our crisis management process, and direct our Global Watch Center. Some of you may know that as a Global Security Operations Center, or GSOC, making sure that we're identifying any potential issues that could be coming down the road that could disrupt our operations wherever it might be around the world.
Thank you, sir. And Doug.
Hello, everybody. And Kelly, I would say I was sitting there thinking to myself, boy, you've been taking it easy. You need to step it up. Listen to that bio of yours. That's pretty impressive. Congratulations to you. My name is Doug Baker. I'm Vice President of Industry Relations with FMI, the Food Industry Association, and we represent retailers of all sizes, from a single store retailer up to the largest national and multinational retailers. We also represent the product manufacturers that do business with those retailers and wholesalers, and then a large assortment of companies that support the industry, from technology to food safety to thought leadership. So it's quite a community, and it's been quite 11 months. My primary focus with FMI is overseeing our emergency response activities and asset protection issues. But I also have the pleasure of leading a CIO council, as well as a private brands council as well.
It's hard to sort of overstate, how how unique this group is, right? I mean, we're talking about petroleum, gasoline products. We're talking about pharmaceuticals. We're talking about food. I mean, these are primary inputs. Any one of these is so important to a normal functioning daily life for every American, right? And you guys are all in charge of the crisis management / emergency response functions for your corporations or your association. So you're really the point of the spear, as they say, and we want to sort of glean for the folks listening, what were your pain points, and what were the real insights that you earned essentially over the last year in the midst of this global pandemic. And when we talked about it, sorry, I'm going to turn my there was so much in our pre-meeting to talk about that I think there's plenty for the audience to hear. And I would just say we have some general questions, but if folks want to put some questions into the chat, we'll try to get to as many of those as we can, especially questions that relate to what we're saying here. So we'll start back on the far right, Doug, and we got these pretty straightforward questions, but can you talk a little bit about the last year for you? Talk about coronavirus. Talk about those things that really you scratched your head, on that day, and you said, I should have known this, but gosh, now it's really it's hitting me, in the head with a baseball bat that I had this issue, I had this vulnerability, I had this dependency, and now I have a big problem that I have to solve. So can you just give us a couple of examples of that, if you could?
Yeah, sure. So, we start the year off every year, the end of January. We bring the industry together in our midwinter executive conference, and we're actually doing it virtually this year, as many are, and as this is. So we had about 800 people that were together the end of January and the first couple of days of February. But we understood a little bit of what was going on as a global trade association with members in many countries. We have members who were in Wuhan, China. And so we were staying very close to them and trying to understand what they were dealing with the anticipation that it might be heading here to the US. So about mid-February, we lit up our crisis management team, which, we have about 80 employees at FMI. And typically there's a much smaller team that can deal with crisis. And it was understood pretty quickly that this was going to be an all hands on deck activity. from our food safety professionals, our regulatory affairs professionals, as well as the work within our industry relations. And, I think probably the biggest challenge that was thrust on the industry, and everybody saw it play out on the news, was the ability to be able to keep our shelves full. And for a number of discussions with media, it was the supply chain was broke. And the one thing that I wanted to express to the public at that point is that the supply chain wasn't broke. We see supply chains break during a hurricane, during an earthquake, during a major fire. And that's when production is completely cut off, whether it can't travel over a road or because of power, it can't even be produced. And that wasn't the situation, but it was the challenge was it was like we were playing whack-a-mole with the virus early on. It was showing up, and so as quickly as a retailer who might do business in multiple states maneuvered inventory to a part of the country that was responding to pantry loading as a result of the virus really taking a hold in their state, it immediately showed up somewhere else. And so it was splitting those supply chains up pretty aggressively. And it became very apparent that as an industry, we needed to look for ways to become more efficient so that we could get more inventory into the pipeline and across the US. And the only way we were able to accomplish that was by reducing the number of SKUs that those machines were having to produce, right? So if you saw, 5, 6, 7 flavors of bleach pre-pandemic, you might have only seen one in 2 different sizes during the pandemic. Of course, toilet paper, that was, it was such an issue, it became a joke for many people as to, why toilet paper? But that was a typical product that would spike even during a natural disaster like a hurricane. So it wasn't out of the ordinary. It was just the fact that it wasn't a regional event anymore. It was now a national event, and everybody was feeling the same thing. So the one example that I have for the group is, when we saw an entire sector shut down in food service, and we had another sector, the retail food area, that was under duress from a supply standpoint, we had to figure out how quickly to get product from food service into retail. So working with a third-party technology company, and we literally started off first with a piece of paper that you could fill of a fillable form. It connected food service companies and distributors with retailers, and it allowed them to move their inventory over to retail. It allowed them to move their trucking over to retail. It allowed them to move their labor over to retail, and in many instances also their capacity. And the one good thing that this did is it allowed a very bad situation where people were losing their jobs over it. It allowed that particular industry and those critical areas to continue to work because they were now servicing the retail food industry. And so now that is actually an electronic marketplace platform that continues today. So that's not only something we learned, we had a challenge, but we see it's going to be an improvement and a benefit if we ever face this again.
So Doug, so it's interesting. So the supply chain wasn't broke. Essentially, you looked into the job, you looked into China, and you saw this what you call pantry loading. You saw human behavior, which really caused a surge in demand in certain areas. That was that your impact? Was that the immediate impact that that all of a sudden the demand just surged in specific areas because people were loading their pantries? Was that what it was that you were dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, that was some of it, Kelly. And I think the other thing too that we learned quickly from our members across the water is, a lot of those things that you saw that were providing additional safety and social distancing within the store, those were also learnings that we were bringing back from China and from Italy and other parts around the world.
Yeah.
So plexiglass, and what that did, it just helped us to deploy that stuff that much more quickly in this country. Because we had such open lines of communications with retailers in other countries.
Interesting. So you saw that happen, and you saw that plexiglass, you saw that social distancing in those retail outlets, and you said, that's coming. We have to get ready for that.
Yeah.
And I just last point, and I want to understand it. So
this exchange that you're talking about, did you essentially leapfrog the wholesale sector and went direct to retail? I mean, what was that solution that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, it's available to retailers and wholesalers. It was really what we did was we connected food service and retail. Pre-pandemic.
Food service and retail. Okay, so that's food service being service to cafeterias and prepared outlets and restaurants and things like that.
Yeah, fast casual, quick service restaurants.
Okay.
Connected that industry with our retail industry.
That is classic an example of breaking a silo wall down as I can think of, right? Those two didn't overlap. They were completely separate, right? But when they but just removing that silo wall, like you said, it allowed those people who lost their jobs in the on the service side to work on the retail side, and then you also had more product going into the retail side as well, right?
Yeah. In better days, Kelly, those two industries compete, right, head to head. And just in the last 3 to 4 years, that food dollar flipped, and it was typically majority of it was food at home. And
Yeah.
53, 54 cents of everybody's food dollar about 3 or 4 years ago flipped to food service. All of that came back to grocery retail because of the pandemic.
Interesting. Great story. Robert, can you talk about some similar, talk about January, February 2020. What did it look like for you guys?
Well, we also have operations in China. So we kind of got a little bit of a heads up on that and started watching that and saw some potentials. But I think like everybody else, it came quicker than we expected. It came harder than we expected. And it came bigger than I think anybody expected. So right off the bat, it did catch us by surprise. But again, the enormity and the how quickly it moved probably caught everyone a little bit by surprise. Here at AmerisourceBergen, we are a pharmaceutical distributor, but we are not large in the PPE world. We are primarily a pharmaceutical distributor. Some of the other larger companies and some other companies here in the United States and around the globe are the PPE providers. We're not. So we were on the edge of sourcing PPE, just like everyone else was. We needed that for our frontline workers in our distribution centers. We had to keep them safe so they could continue to pick, pack, and ship product so that product could get to the hospital so the patients could be attended to. Our drivers the same way. So we did run into some of that issue. But I think one of the biggest things that we saw was information based off of information. Early on, things started at the county level, quarantines, shutdowns, restrictions at the county level, then moved to the state level, then basically to a national level. But keep in mind, we're also a global company, so we had countries that were shutting down borders, that were impacting our ability to move product. World Courier is our is our specialty logistics company, and one of their main focuses is clinical trials. They're moving clinical trials all around the world. And the majority of that movement, believe it or not, is on passenger airplanes, in the bellies of passenger airplanes.
Yeah.
We like to think that our COOP plans and our business continuity plans are very robust. We can deal with the shutdown or the loss of an airport for a while. I don't think any of us were prepared to lose the entire airline industry for several months. Now, again, it didn't go the whole months, and some airlines did, again, begin to fly. But, clinical trials, again, it's based on timing is everything. Time sensitivity is one of the most important things in a clinical trial. Getting that product from point A to point B in a given time by the loss of thousands of potential flights that really put stress on their ability to move. Again, there were airplanes, there just wasn't as many opportunities. And one of my favorite stories around PPE is we were having a conference call here internally, and one of our directors from one of our business units at the end of the day went home and was having a conversation with her husband and talking about our inability to source N95s. We have a group of nurses from our US Bio Services business. They're home infusion nurses. So they're going to people's homes and providing infusion service. We needed to get them N95s. We were really struggling, just like many people were, to get those. That conversation occurred over a dinner table. The next day, I get a call from a gentleman from an industrial construction and welding company in Spartanburg, South Carolina, saying, hey, I hear you're looking for N95s. Said, I got a couple cases I could get to you. It's just a matter how information, how communication was just opened up. And not just internally here, but across the public sector. Talking with FEMA and CISA and HHS and the state departments of health, and especially our partners at the state emergency management agencies, the private sector, the All Hazards Consortium, and what they've done in the information sharing, as well as Healthcare Ready. And I'm going to stop and do a shameless plug or a PSA announcement. Those of you that are on the call, probably most of you already are members or have relationships with these groups. If you don't, I urge you to do that. Reach out, get that relationship. Most of your states have private sector. Many of your states have private sector liaisons and private sector programs. Maryland has one, North Carolina has one, Pennsylvania, our home state here has one. Those are just to name a few. If you're not there, get there, and get there now as opposed to later. But I think that's a shining moment from COVID as well. How everybody came together and the sharing of information helped, I believe, helped this whole process along and got us closer to an end quicker than we probably would have had we not been able to communicate in that fashion.
So you used Bob, you used the cross-sector group that you had been meeting with prior to 2020, and that's how you shared information, you shared resources, and so you were able to use that planning group in the job to solve problems. And is that how you found your N95s, through that same group?
Well, partly, yes. Some of it came from that. Some of it came eventually naturally once the supply started recovering. But most of it, yes, was through. And I know FEMA and All Hazards set up opportunities to go out and to sell and to source PPE. So those things were built on the fly as well, and they were really great opportunities.
Sherry, so when you 10, 15 years from now, when you're telling the story at the at the beach house or something of coronavirus, the early days of coronavirus, what stories are you going to tell?
Well, one thing I wanted to point out too before I answer that is that as gas station owners, we of course also represent the C-stores and the food industry. And we did benefit from Doug and FMI's early, information on models and suggested ways to keep the employees and customers safe. So we appreciate that. But I also want to say
sorry, Sherry. Let me just. I want to get some. So what is that information that the FMI gave you?
Well, the information on how that Doug and FMI were obtaining from the other countries that were hit sooner than us, as far as how to protect consumers and employees, like putting up plexiglass shields around, the cash registers and things like that.
That's so interesting. So
yeah.
We just saw the full circle. So Doug and his team looked into China and saw that stuff happening and circled around, and through your group, you were able to actually on the ground inform those store owners, and they started to build that out.
Exactly.
Wow,
we do not have, we do not represent retailers in other countries like FMI does. And so their information to them, and there were a few others, was very helpful in allowing us to gear up very quickly, because of course there was no warning that we would need to have this kind of preparation.
I'm coming back to you, Sherry, but I have to interject because in our experience, I'm a big healthcare organization, and we didn't do that. We were seeing, other folks in, nurses and things at places where at entrances and things, they were saying, don't we need the plexiglass that they're doing in these places? And we're like, nah, you don't need it. Nobody's saying you needed that. So we were behind that. And then when we finally put it in, you're like, oh, this is great. I love this. But, I asked you about this 3 weeks ago and you told me I didn't need it. So what the heck's have been happening the last 3 weeks? So I think really doing that early is a huge benefit to a lot of folks, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah.
Kelly,
So
I
anyway,
would props out to Tom Moran and the All Hazards too, because that really
Absolutely.
kept Sherry and I connected, as well as Robert. So you were able to have those conversations. Associations stick together pretty close, but not typically across sector as close.
Right.
But All
That's
Hazards brought us together.
and that really is the magic, this cross-sector group that wouldn't have a reason to talk, but because we know the reasons, the value becomes so apparent. In this example is just a great example of how that existing relationship was able to benefit, I don't know, hundreds of store owners, Sherry, right? I mean, lots of them.
Thousands, yes.
Thousands.
And it's not All Hazards and Tom, huge. I too want to encourage anyone that's not involved with AHC to do so. You'll definitely benefit from it, and we will benefit from having you in it. But we also were able to communicate some of these ideas across sector, across industry through FEMA and DOE, the many calls that they have, and they were very helpful. And we were able to, talk about things that we had found that helped us to protect folks, and then also to brainstorm for ideas, and both groups, the All Hazards Consortium and the government, very helpful.
Government, so there's a lot of them. There's the business EOC. FEMA has there's the state groups. Sherry, which one do you remember which ones you guys are working through?
Yeah, so we worked a lot, of course, with DOE, DHS, FEMA, mostly through the MBEOC, and also the ONG SCC group, which is also primarily, it's both industry and government, and that allowed us to have a lot of communication, frequent communication with both industry and the government.
It would be interesting, and I think, actually Tom's bumping me. So the next round, I'm going to ask you guys some of the use cases that you're thinking about for the future. And so think about that. The NBEOC that FEMA does, the National Business Emergency Operations Center, it would be, I think, so amazing if it was able to synthesize the key elements of all of the other subunits, all the state coordinating councils and the regional coordinating councils. If all of that was able to somehow bubble up into that NBEOC, so there was this sort of coordinated a conversation, because again, I think and again, just going back to that one example that Doug brought up, which is the infrastructure, the changes to the interior that we're seeing everywhere, restaurants and everywhere we go now, we see that. It would have been the sooner that gets into wide awareness, the sooner the benefit, and so it's but it's tough. It's a national issue. So Sherry, we'll start with you now on the future stuff. Can you talk about your planning, either for a pandemic or something else? What kinds of use cases, what kinds of problems do you still need to pay attention to, and what would you work through these cross-sector coordinating councils to try to solve?
Well, all types of disasters have interdependencies between energy industries, electricity, communications, and then the federal, state, and local governments. But the pandemic, of course, brought about new interdependencies with the medical industry and the PPE industries. Tom and the All Hazards Consortium did put together a PPE site which is just outstanding, where you can go and put in, your request, any size request for any product, and within an hour have multiple responses of people, of groups who have that available and will get it to you, and the cost. And it's vetted. It's so vetted again and again and again. So that has been extremely helpful. Also the CRA that All Hazards put together has been very helpful. And that's the communications, for basic communications routing information. So basically, if a driver needs to get somewhere, he or she can pull information up and know that what the best route is, and whether there are any obstacles, and whether there are waivers in effect there. And again, just very practical, useful information that is constantly updated. And that's, just that practicality is what everyone needs to respond during any kind of disaster, and especially a pandemic. So those are the main, really the main things that we are still working on using even better. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but there was one other thing. But let me get back to you on that.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, Sherry, we were talking a little bit about Sandy last week, and
Right.
the issue with your sector, and and the issue of energy, and the issue of for the Northeast, all of a sudden, well, I think that the baseball bat moment was when and Doug was talking about this, where we realized, you need power to get the gas out of the underground storage tank, right? It's like, how obvious is that? But then it was more than that, because we had pipeline issues, we had tanker issues, we had issues at the ports, with all kinds of stuff, and it was a confluence of events. But for us, and I was at the city at the time, it became a governor issue. I don't know if folks remember, but Governor Christie in New Jersey instituted pretty early on a license plate program, whereby odd numbers got it one day and even numbers got it another day, and the New York governor was a little slow in doing that, and caught a tremendous amount of criticism because of that, right? And so, but if those two had been talking, if that had bubbled up, and that sort of idea of a solution had bubbled up, and both governors had implemented or talked about implementing roughly at the same time, politically it would have been a much different issue. It wouldn't have hurt these folks. But and were there similarities between Sandy and COVID for your group, Sherry, or was it just
absolutely
a completely different job?
Well, it is very different, but it is also very similar, just in the fact that all disasters are very similar in how the response has to be handled. What's really different with the pandemic is that it's nationwide, of course, actually worldwide, but for our purposes, nationwide.
Yeah.
And that made it very different, but it also, our communications with all of our state association executives are very effective, and we were able to communicate back and forth of any needs that folks had, and that we could in turn take to the government or whoever needed. Like there was an issue at one point with replacement drivers at terminals not being able to get into terminals. Like for instance, if someone was sick or being quarantined, they might have to send a new driver into a terminal to pick up fuel. And that would usually occur during a disaster. But in this case, there were some greater concerns. And so we worked with the International Terminal Liquids Association, and were able to put together a list of things that the terminal operators would need in order to feel comfortable with the replacement driver who was not actually certified for that specific terminal. They're certified, but not for that specific terminal. And when that happens, that driver has to get specific training right then on the spot. So in order to give them that's what was needed. And we were able to get that information very quickly from like I said, the association, and then get that out to our folks, and boom, that cleared that what was becoming quickly becoming a big hurdle, because about 50% of our drivers are coming from, from owned by the marketer itself, and then 50% are the they're contracted out, so that's not quite as much of a problem. But when you're talking the really small marketer with either one or two drivers, they have to be able to make these replacements during a time like that.
I love that story. That's classic. That's emergency management 101. I mean, I can see that happening. I can see you guys wrapping your minds around that problem quickly, and having a couple of meetings and fixing that.
Yeah.
Because if you're not getting drivers in there, you're not moving any gas. And
right. It was literally one or two phone calls to ITLA, and then I took down what they told me. We got it out to our folks, and it was just that efficient.
That's awesome.
Yeah, love it.
Robert Crow, use cases. Are you thinking of ahead to any use cases? Or is there unfinished work that you think you're going to do that sort of became apparent to you over the last year?
I don't think unfinished yet. That all depends what happens tomorrow, because as we've seen that there's been many surprises since March of 2020 along with this. This last year has caused us to take a good look at several things that we do. One of the things is we realized, we being everyone, that we're all essential to some point. In the beginning, hospitals, doctors, nurses, that's easy. Then okay, maybe our delivery drivers in trucks, yeah, that's an easy one too. But initially, everybody forgot about the people working in the distribution center that picked and packed the products. If they can't get to work to pick and pack the products, they're not going on the trucks, and the trucks aren't getting to the hospital. So again, with communication and reaching out to the different groups, that got handled quickly. That got handled very quickly. And another issue.
How did you handle it? Did you pull people off their desks that were doing, finance, and you had them going in and packing crates, or how
no, just getting them to the essential level where they could be on the roads, they could be going back and forth to work. Initially, that was, can I leave my house and go to work?
Getting them designated as essential, so they okay.
Yep, and through our state partners and through CISA as well.
Yeah.
But then also, like I said, I think we realize there are a lot more essential people in this world than we realize.
It's hard. It's who can you point to these days that's not essential, right? They're essential to something, and you're going to find it out when you tell them to stay home, right?
We're all connected, either upstream or downstream. We're all connected, even though we're different verticals. We're all connected in some way or another. But I think one of the biggest things that we saw from a response to COVID and pandemic was from a distribution perspective, and of those that are in the healthcare industry can kind of understand that we distribute from our manufacturer partners through a fair share allocation program, and making sure that the product that we get is the opportunity is to distribute that evenly and in a fair share. But COVID was anything but fair share. Hotspots here, hotspots there, down south. They're like, what's going on up north for months down there?
Yeah.
We didn't have a problem. So what we had to do, we stepped back and we had to take a look at that fair share allocation program and figure out how can we still meet our responsibilities to our manufacturer partners but yet get product to the places. New York, New Jersey needed product 10 times more than Dallas Fort Worth did at that time.
In March and April.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dallas Fort Worth got their fair share when they needed it. But when it was time, as you were saying in March, when you were, ear deep into COVID, we needed to be able to respond to that.
Yeah.
So that was one of the biggest things that we saw, and we did some internal work, sourcing some information out of Johns Hopkins. We were using their dashboard as well, following the hotspots and being able to flex our distribution. We've always had a very nimble COOP program for being able to move orders and such, again, short periods of time. But with that, that was probably one of the biggest things I think that has come out of that for us from a pandemic perspective.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, with your products, your products are life-saving products. So you're talking about lives there, right? These are weighty decisions that you're making about who gets what. And, it's an algorithm essentially, you have to be able to talk it, right? I mean, if you're talking to hospitals and they're saying, I need, well, for us in the spring, it was a lot of pharmaceuticals around these long-term intubated patients, that were on vents for days and weeks, and so there was a surge in demand for those, and so not, having that algorithm and being able to talk that algorithm, right, and explain to your customers, who gets what, because it has to be perceived as fair. Otherwise, you lose the game, right? It's all about this perception of fairness, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and I had one other thing, Robert. Anyway, so Doug Baker, same question to you, but I also want, last week, I want to, maybe you could share a couple of those, I guess, strategies and tools that came out of COVID for you guys.
Yeah, sure. To Bob, as a husband who has a wife who's a critical care nurse and taking care of the worst, I appreciate everything you guys have been doing to support hospitals. And if I could tell you a story about Essential, the essential worker, just to highlight what Bob was talking about. And it was the last thing that would have ever come to my mind. You go into a grocery store and typically nobody uses cash to pay anymore, right? You're using a debit card or a credit card and you're punching your PIN number in on a pad. Looks just like an ATM or a phone. Well, when the pandemic happened, both consumers and employees started sanitizing those. And whether you're using a spray or you're using a wipe, they both had too much moisture in them. It was making the pads wet and it was shorting them out. So retailers were sending 25, 30, 50 of these in at a time to be repaired, but not every company that repairs those was identified as essential and therefore couldn't go into work in full force in order to repair them and get them back into the stores so that we could continue to take care of consumers. So, immediately, working with the White House, we did the same thing. You basically had to identify the entire supply chain from farm gate to dinner plate and anybody that touched that supply chain and get them moved up to essentials so that you could continue to do and get to the end result you were trying to get to. So
but that Doug, that's such a great story. That's even, I'm a big proponent of supply chain and all the links, and it's only as strong as the weakest link. That's another link at the end that I never even thought about, which is the link that's, you're standing there, you got it in front of you. You got it in the bag. You're going to walk out to the car. Now you got another link because you got to put your code in the thing. Crazy. That's like an extra link on the supply chain, like that no one thought about, right?
Your expression was mine when I got the phone call.
Yeah.
So similarly, yeah. So So thinking about use cases for us, there's a couple that really have sort of popped up. One, staying within the supply chain and the food supply chain, I sort of describe it as having a control tower for the food industry, similar to what we have for the airline industry, right? At any given moment, we know where that airplane's at. If it's safe and is performing correctly, we can watch it. And we don't have that as solidly in the grocery industry. It's very siloed. It's closed looped, but it's not even that efficient from a closed loop system. So the one thing that we've been talking about is the need to create that control tower, not only for the individual retailer and wholesaler to understand where their supply is at, but also as an industry to understand where there might be surplus of food. So that's one key element. We're also dealing with food waste more than we ever have. And it seems sort of odd to say food waste when we saw the empty shelves. But two things happened. We also watched and witnessed on the news as farmers were plowing under crops as they were dumping milk, because we sell more milk institutionally and dry than we do in grocery stores. And so that just elevated people's awareness of food waste. Between 40 and 50% of all food waste actually comes out of the consumer's home, not from the supply chain itself. And so, that's something else that probably was accentuated as people were having very full pantries and going out and buying secondary freezers and loading those up, is that we were starting to feel that. So as an industry that was really focused on just-in-time inventory to reduce waste, we had to move to a just-in-case inventory in order to deal with spikes in demand. And now we're trying to figure out, how do we reduce food waste at the same time run a just-in-case inventory system? So that's another use case we're working on. And then if you think about how the consumer has been purchasing food, e-commerce doubled overnight. We had retailers that were showing 300% increases in their e-commerce. And prior to the pandemic, it was on average 3% of a store's total sales. It's now anywhere from 12 to 20% of their total store sales. And I don't know about any of you in your experience shopping online, but the first few times, it's a little wonky because that e-commerce platform doesn't know who you are yet. And so as the computer continues to learn, it gets better. But there's so much more we need to be doing, not only to make the e-commerce shop efficient for the consumer, but also make it profitable for the retailer. E-commerce is not a profitable platform for retailers to deliver food. And it gets less profitable if it has to be delivered to the home. So it's working on how do we improve that through automation and through optimization in order to make it both efficient but profitable. As grocery retailers, they live on basically 1 penny on average of every dollar spent in the store it goes to the bottom line. So there's not a lot of wiggle room, and they're having to experiment in a lot of different ways.
And it's interesting. And Sherry, what was the thing that Doug was telling us about last week? There were a couple of things that you talked about, that marketplace that was new, that was so interesting. What were the other ones, just quickly, Doug, that you guys built?
I think the other one, Sherry will remind me, was related to labor. So the labor platform that we created, again, similar to food resources, retailers were needing to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of employees in order to be able to deal with the additional demand. You also had delivery services like Uber and Instacart that were also needing additional labor. And we had this whole a number of industries that were actually asking to close down, from restaurant to apparel to furniture. And so working with an organization called Eightfold AI, we developed a labor platform that allowed companies like a Macy's to take their employee pool and put it into this platform, which would then allow manufacturers, retailers, and wholesalers recruit out of that platform and bring them into our industry, even if for a temporary time until they were able to get their previous job back, allowing them to continue to work. And then also assisting that grocer or that manufacturer or wholesaler to be able to do the things they needed to do. And that is in existence today. The one update we made is it's no longer a company activity. An individual could go into that platform and put themselves into it to be able to be recruited.
That's so cool. Because, you know, in this high-tech world, as you said, and everybody is so aware that this e-commerce thing has exploded, but ultimately e-commerce, that last mile is people. It's human beings, you know, carrying stuff and, you know, ringing doorbells and driving down the road in a van and with boxes. You know, it's like, it's in some ways it's a low-tech activity. I mean, there's a lot of information that's high-tech, but ultimately it's a person, you know, carrying a box up a set of stairs and dropping it on a doorstep, right? And so that's a really interesting solution. The last thing I want to just quickly talk about is really, and Sherry alluded to it, you know, how you guys work together through the All Hazards Consortium. I mean, what is that group? How often do you talk? Just so for folks who aren't familiar with it, how much of an investment of time is it, and how does it work? Sherry, you want to take a stab at it?
Well, again, I think we talk both through All Hazards and through government calls, but primarily it's the introduction and the fact that we know we can talk professionally and not have just not feel like it's just going to be something that's released to everyone. Through Tom's group, we have calls with Tom. He has multiple working groups that some of us are on, and I think probably everyone on this call. And that's pretty much it. And then, of course, once you're comfortable with those sort of conversations, you're able to just reach out directly.
And so is the SICE an example of that, Sherry?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, and so that, and so like you said, I mean, these are businesses, and so, you know, there's a sensitivity around sharing, and it's a safe, the SICE is a safe forum to do that, and and where people trust each other, right? Robert, you want to take that as well? How does it work? How does this upfront coordination with these planning groups work for you?
I think there really is. It's all the relationships. It's all the time spent in conversation before you're standing knee deep in water. It's knowing who your partners are, knowing who that is. Sure, during an incident, you're getting that hot stove information, and that you need that, and that is good. But again, it's not the first time you may be hearing someone speak. You know who that is. You know what, you know, where they're coming from, and you know, even what their issues, you know, holistically might be based on what vertical they're from. So a lot of that handshake and get to know you is already out of the way, and you can get right down to brass tacks when things are hot and heavy. But there, you know, we have our weekly call, but that's more of a committee type call. But you know, depending on the incident and frequency, the incident will determine the frequency, and that goes the same way with state calls, or that even goes the same way with federal calls. Mm-hmm. The only thing with those is I'm sure Tom would be happy if there were hundreds of people, you know, on the All Hazards Consortium. But you know, when you get into the FEMA and CISA calls, you know, you're potentially talking 100 plus people. State calls can range anywhere between, you know, 50 and 100 people as well. This call is a little bit smaller, but I think the thing is, it's that relationship building that's already taken place.
And we just got a few minutes left. And Doug, I want to go to you and let's expand this a little bit. So the calls, you know, take us into a typical day, sort of at the peak of 2020 for you, and because for us, you know, and I know everybody, I'm looking, I think there's 150 people listening to this thing. It's the nightmare of the conference calls, right? It's like, what conference call am I on right now? And how many more do I have today? And what was that like? And what talk us through, what calls were you on? And I mean, in as much, whatever detail you can share.
Yeah, sure. And I see in addition to having our own councils and committees that are focused on these topics, and I see a few people attending from our crisis management, our supply chain resilience committee. So shout out to Katie and Adam. What we opted to do, and it took a little bit of time, but we had a prep call, but we really leaned on the MBOC call, the CISA call, the all hazards call, in order to make sure, because of what you exactly said, you could have been killed by a gazillion phone calls. But we also sort of reorganized ourselves functionally inside of our organization. So if it was a regulatory or a policy issue, then we had a group that was managing that aspect. If it was a best practice, we created a number of best practice guides. We had a team that was set up to do that. And their sole source was to reach out to the member community, learn from them, coalesce their information, and then put it back in a more formal document so that we could broadly share across industry and industries. And that's where, we wanted to make sure that anybody who was interested in the information could get it, because, we were all learning together. I kept saying at the beginning of this, that the playbook was changing daily, right? And so we constantly were updating that playbook. So to be able to sort of break out based on your functional area, I think really helped keep the number of calls down. But then also you talk about preparation. And I think the things that we're doing today, and the relationships that we have with all hazards and with MBOC and DHS, doing that practice, thinking through these scenarios that might face us. And, we never really thought through this one, but believe it or not, we actually had a guide that we had during H1N1. So we had the framework. We needed to pull it out and then look at it and say, what's changed today versus what we were experiencing then, and get that up to date and get it out as quickly as possible. So we did have something to draw upon, and we do have the ability to draw upon our other guides that we use because of natural disaster or human-made disasters, and we just had to update those. So they're probably, and if Katie or Adam on this call could speak, they'd probably tell you, yeah, there was way too many calls. But you also didn't want to miss one because information was coming so quickly. You wanted to make sure that you were there to see if there was anything that you might have missed that's going to be important to your organization.
So interesting. And the other thing I think is the timing and Doug, what you were talking about looking ahead into Wuhan in January, these groups. And the key to the All Hazards Consortium and the key to these working groups is that they're always meeting. They're meeting on a regular basis. So I think in the case of emergency management, there were a lot of planning groups. I mean, if I had a nickel for every one of my colleagues who said, we had a pandemic plan or we had a pod plan, why aren't we using the pod plan that we worked on? And in some cases, the answer is, well, you had your pod plan and you finished your pod plan, then you put it on a shelf, and the group that built it just drifted off, right? But if you had brought that group back in advance and turned on your pod plan and had all of this stuff working and in place, then the response would have had something to fold into, rather than sort of, because things move so quickly, by the time you realize that, the mayor or the governor said, where are my pods? He didn't see them working. So he or she went and built their own and went around the emergency manager. So this idea of having this ongoing group, this ongoing communication is so important. And that's why I'm so glad Bob, gave that shameless plug. I think it was shameless, but I think it was good. I think that's it. And I want to thank this very distinguished panel, Doug Baker, Robert Crow, Sherry Stone, really interesting conversation. I'm going to open it back up to Laura and Tom, if they're there. Tom gave me the high sign. And there he is. So Tom, what do you think?
Thank you. I mean, I think this should have been a 3-hour panel, I learn every time we go into this. Anyway, thank you all, personally and professionally. It's more well done. Great information. We're going to go to break. We're going to have a video. I'll announce that, and then Laura will have a couple comments. Again, part of what we want to do with our breaks is turn them into education vignettes, right, about use cases and some of our leadership. So on this next one, you're going to hear about a brand new initiative in R&D right now. It's in the oven. It's going to be used to help coordinate multiple states and fleets on fleet movement, right? And it's fantastic capability that's being developed. And also you're going to hear from Joe Picciano. Joe is a longtime board member of the consortium, ran New Jersey Office of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness. Kelly knows Joe. I think everybody in the business knows Joe. He's with FEMA for a while. Great insight as to why working together is so important. So Laura, I'll turn it over to you and we can go to break.
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you to all the panelists. We're going to tee up another video. And for those of you who are coming back, we'll start back at 3:40 Eastern time. Thanks so much, panelists.